Hey, it's Sherry. I'm so happy you decided to watch my video today because I think it's a good one. I came up with 15 unique ideas for creating pumpkin home decor on a budget. And because I just thought up many of these ideas, I don't think you will have seen them before. I'm so excited to show you what I came up with. So let's get started. For pumpkin project number 1, you'll need an old shutter. Cut or hammer out the slats, but save them because you could always use them for a future project. Give your shutter a couple coats of paint, and then cut out a piece of fabric just slightly smaller than the size of your shutter. I used a thrift store dish towel that I got for 99 cents. Hot glue or staple your piece of fabric to the back of your shutter. To create a stem for your pumpkin, drill a hole along the top edge of the shutter and then hot glue a piece of stick in the hole. I cut off the hemmed edges of the dish towel and tied them around the stick to create tendrils for the pumpkin. Then I hot glued on a little Spanish moss around the stem and some leaves that I cut off of some flower scraps that I had. I spray painted the Dollar Tree metal word harvest and attached it to the bottom of my shutter using a couple nails, but you could glue it on. I added a sawtooth hanger to the back so it could be hung on the wall, but I think it looks really cute just propped up on a shelf leaning against the wall. If you don't decorate with orange for fall, you could paint the shutter white and add fabric that matches your existing decor. For the next project, you need 4 pieces of scrap wood in different sizes. I found these pieces in my garage and I didn't cut them or do anything to them. Drill holes in the top of each piece and add a stick to create a stem. Lay out the wood pieces, staggering the heights to create a pleasing arrangement, and then hot glue or nail the pieces together. I drilled small holes in old Scrabble letters to spell out the word fall, and then tied them to the sticks with twine. I created tendrils using paper-covered florist wire. For further embellishment, I hot glued on some Spanish moss, some leaf scraps, and some jute rope that I unraveled. This is a super easy project and a great way to make use of some scrap wood that you might have lying around your garage. If you don't like the look of your wood scraps, you could just paint and distress them before gluing them together. For the next project, I'm going to save 5 books that might otherwise have ended up in a U.S. landfill. I used my table saw to cut a couple books to the desired size. Then I used my orbital sander to smooth down the cut edges. I used a utility knife to cut along the binding in the front and back of the book to make it easier to rip off the cover. I typed out the first few lines from this autumn poem and then printed them out on antique-looking paper. I cut out each line of the poem in a strip and then Mod Podged it to the front of one of the distressed books. Then I hot glued the books together, arranging the sizes in the shape of a pumpkin. I drilled a hole through the top, going through the top 2 books, and then added a little hot glue and a stick to create a stem. I tied some twine around the books and then added some extra hot glue in between the front of each book to make sure they stayed firmly together. To make it look more like a pumpkin, I added ringlets made from paper-covered florist wire and some leaves taken from some plant scraps that I had. I know that some of you feel that I ruined these books in making this project, but I feel that by repurposing the books, I am actually keeping them out of the landfill for a little while longer. For the next pumpkin project, you'll need a roll of veneer edging, which cost about $6 or $7 at Lowe's or Home Depot. Cut 4 strips to the same length. Hot glue the ends of the first strip together to form a circle. Then make 3 more circles, each time overlapping the circles you've created before, and hot gluing them in place. I glued a small wood round to the bottom to hold it steady and keep it from rolling around. And I glued a wood cap from Walmart to the top to act as a stem. I glued in a second wood circle on the inside bottom to create a base for a votive candle or flowers. And finally, I tied several strands of raffia around the cap. You could easily dress up these veneer pumpkins by painting the veneer strips or adding washi tape, and you could put any number of different small items inside them. For project number 5, you're going to need 2 wooden salad bowls. Glue them together using super glue or E6000. When the glue is dry, paint the bowls with a primer or with a coat of chalk paint. Because I'm out of pumpkin-colored chalk paint, I spray painted my bowls with vintage orange spray paint. When the paint was dry, I applied a coat of antiquing wax, wiping off the excess. I superglued a large stick to the top center and then added leaves and a florist wire ringlet. This turned out even cuter than I expected, and because of the design on the top bowl, I don't even think that you can tell that it's 2 bowls glued together. For the next project, I wanted to make use of this little wooden wheelbarrow that I've had in my stash for quite a while. I gave it 2 coats of dark brown chalk paint and then distressed it a bit with sandpaper. I did not apply any wax. I printed out 2 pumpkin labels from the Graphics Fairy and applied one to each side of the wheelbarrow using Mod Podge. I rubbed some sandpaper over some small terracotta pots that I had to make them look a bit more aged. I hammered a nail set through the holes to make them larger, then hot glued a small stick in each hole. I also glued on some leaves and Spanish moss to the top of each terracotta pot. I put the pots in the wheelbarrow and then stuffed Excelsior all around. The pots held firmly in place. I only needed to hot glue one of the pots that kept falling out the end. I had this little bonsai rake, so I stuck it in the wheelbarrow too. I'm trying to use up many of the things that I already have, and I think this was a great use of this little wooden wheelbarrow. And I think the terracotta pumpkins are absolutely adorable. Like the wheelbarrow, I have had these Bullseye rosettes in my stash for a long time. 2 of the rosettes were already painted, so I painted the other 2 with the last bit of my Waverly pumpkin chalk paint. I distressed the edges a bit using a Dollar Tree sanding block, and then I applied antiquing wax to all 4 rosettes, wiping off the excess with a rag. Wanting a bit of a sheen, I gave them a satin top coat. Then I drilled a hole in the top, glued in a stick, and for these I just tied on some raffia. Lowe's and Home Depot sell rosettes like these for $2 or $3 depending on the size. Although these rosette pumpkins are simple, I think they're interesting in their own right and don't need a lot of embellishment. For pumpkin project number 8, you'll need an old alarm clock. I see them quite frequently at my thrift store. Unscrew the back, then you'll be able to easily remove the bells, the mechanics, and the clock face. I also removed the piece of glass. I spray painted the body of the clock orange and the bells and handle green. I cut a new back plate for the clock out of a piece of scrap cardboard, and then I covered it with a piece of scrapbook paper, attaching it with glue stick. I went around the inner edge of the clock with hot glue to attach the piece of cardboard. Then I hot glued a small piece of styrofoam on the inside bottom of the clock. I attached some small pieces of skewer sticks to some Dollar Tree velvet pumpkins and stuck them in the styrofoam. I cut some stems off of another little floral bush that I had and stuck those in, and then added some Spanish moss to fill in any empty spots. As a final touch, I added a little wooden mouse that I had in my stash. I added a little gingham bow and I was done. This cost me less than $5 total, and I think it turned out super cute. I'm definitely going to be looking for more alarm clocks at the thrift store so that I can make another one for Christmas. For the next project, cut the sleeves off of an old sweater, and then cut the sleeves into thirds or fourths depending on the size of pumpkins that you want. You'll have 3 or 4 little sweater tubes. Turn one of the tubes inside out. Sew a basic in and out gathering stitch along the edge of the larger end of the tube. Pull the thread until the end of the sweater gathers up as tightly as possible without breaking your thread, and then run a few stitches back and forth through your end to make sure that the gathering holds in place. Turn your sweater tube right side out and then fill it with pillow stuffing or dried beans. Once your pumpkin is filled, run a gathering stitch along the top edge of the sweater, pull the thread tight, and run a few extra stitches to make sure that the gathering holds in place. Carefully open the hole a bit, insert a small stick, and hot glue it in place. With a new piece of thread, run a few stitches right next to the stick so that the thread is firmly planted in the sweater. Then run a long stitch from next to the stick to the bottom center of your pumpkin. Feed the needle through your pumpkin, coming out at the top next to the stick. Repeat this process 4 more times, evenly spreading those long stitches around the perimeter of the pumpkin. Now you're ready to add embellishments. I like to add leaves, vines, little berries, and of course, Spanish moss. If you want to make a lot of sweater pumpkins, you could sew tubes out of the main part of the sweater, but I like to save the big pieces of sweater for other projects. Covering pumpkins with jute is not a new idea, but I do have some new tricks for you to try. Instead of buying the bright orange styrofoam pumpkins at Dollar Tree, buy the ones that come with flowers instead and save the flowers for other projects. And if you don't like the color of the pumpkin, the coating peels off like an orange, and then you have a perfectly white pumpkin for your project. Drill or cut a hole all the way through your pumpkin. You'll need to make the hole really large. Tie a loop of twine around your pumpkin to get started, and then feed the twine through the hole in the pumpkin and then around the pumpkin and through the hole and around the pumpkin, and just continue this process until you have completely covered the piece of styrofoam. Add a stick and a leaf or two using hot glue. For additional embellishment, I unraveled a couple pieces of the twine until they became fuzzy and hot glued them to the stick. And I created a tendril by wrapping a piece of paper-covered florist wire around a pencil. I made a yarn pumpkin in exactly the same way as I made the jute pumpkin, but this time I learned my lesson and I used my electric foam cutter to cut the hole out of the center of the styrofoam pumpkin. I also used a darning needle to make it easier to feed the yarn through the hole in the pumpkin. I added a few embellishments, including the unraveled twine, and I was done. It takes a little while to completely cover the styrofoam, so may I suggest that you watch your favorite YouTube channel while you're doing it. Instead of covering your styrofoam pumpkins with jute or yarn, you could cover them with any kind of fabric that you like. I chose a couple bandanas. Pull out the stem and then cut out some styrofoam to make that hole larger. Cut out your piece of fabric. Because my pumpkin was smaller, I only needed 1/4 of the bandana. Wrap the fabric around the pumpkin, tucking the ends into the hole on the top, and then add a little bit of hot glue to make sure that it stays in place. Add a stick and any embellishments that you like. I cut off the hemmed edges from my bandana. I folded them and cut them into smaller pieces to create an interesting little embellishment. This is an easy way to use up some of your fabric scraps and also to make pumpkins that coordinate perfectly with your home decor. Have you seen the miniature velvet pumpkins that Dollar Tree has now? They are so cute, and I wanted to feature them in one project. I strung some of those little plastic alphabet beads on a piece of florist wire to spell out "Welcome Fall." And then I attached the wire to 2 nails that I hammered into a small wood box that I had. I hot glued a piece of styrofoam inside the box, and then I began adding the pumpkins. The dark orange pumpkins come on stems, but the lighter orange ones don't, so I cut a small hole in the fabric and added sticks to those. Then I just filled in with a few autumn leaves and some Spanish moss. I've got to hand it to Dollar Tree. I think these little velvet pumpkins are adorable. And for only $1, I'm definitely going to have to think of some other ways to use them. Here's an idea for dressing up a Dollar Tree cloche. Find a candlestick meant for a pillar candle. If you don't like the color of it, give it a couple coats of chalk paint. Distress it with sandpaper and then apply your favorite wax. I used white wax to contrast with my dark brown paint. I attached a wood round to the top of my candlestick using super glue, but you could skip this step. I painted a couple of the Dollar Tree pumpkin picks with a couple coats of chalk paint. I removed the thin stick and replaced it with a small stick from my yard to create a better stem. Then I hot glued some reindeer moss to the wood round and stacked a couple pumpkins on top of that. I thought it needed a little something extra, so I added a couple little dried flowers that I had. Then I was ready to top it with the plastic cloche from Dollar Tree. I think this project is a great idea for making use of some candlesticks that you have but aren't using. And you can leave them out for the rest of the year. by simply trading out the pumpkins for little Christmas trees in a couple months. Okay, we are to our last pumpkin project, and it's the easiest one of all. Find a wire basket that is circular in shape. Then give it a couple coats of your favorite orange spray paint. I weaved some jute rope around the basket a couple times for added interest. When you begin, leave a long end piece so you have something to tie off at the end. Just wrap the rope around a wire, go to the next wire, wrap around it, and continue all the way around your basket. Go around as many times as you like, and then simply tie the rope off when you're done. I think it looks cute empty, but you could fill it with whatever you like. I think some real pumpkins and gourds would look super cute, or maybe even a plant or some driftwood. Well, I hope I shared some original ideas, things that you hadn't thought of before for creating pumpkin home decor. And I included the sweater pumpkins this week because several people requested it in last week's video. So if there are other specific projects that you'd like to see, please let me know in the comments and I'll try to include them in a future video. Well, that's all for today. Until next Tuesday, bye-bye for now.